Well, thank you for letting me be here today, and I am honored to be here to talk with you, I hope, and to have you think with me about education and schooling as it is now and as we might dream of it to be together. Right now, we talk about a lot of gaps in education. We talk about an opportunity gap of whether our students have equal access to quality education across the United States. We also talk about that pervasive achievement gap that we are struggling with. And that achievement gap is something that educators are working on daily to try to close and bring together. And as Victor said, I think there's another kind of gap that we need to talk about. We are living in times that are about testing and accountability, which is an important piece. But the pendulum may have swung very far one direction. And I would contend that it is creating a relevance gap in our schools. So, if you will, I want you to think with me and keep this as an overarching question in your head. What kind of world do we want to create? Because education needs to mirror that world. So then we need to say, well, what does education mirror right now? And I would say if you look back at what your educational experience was like, you might be able to walk into a school today, whether it was a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades ago, and still feel very comfortable. In many of our schools, we still have an industrial era model going on in our schools. And so there's a lot of talk in our world about, so what should education mirror? And you heard Steve earlier today talk about 21st century skills. So should education be about the 4 core areas only? Or should it be about creativity or innovation or critical thinking or that work ethic or collaborating with others or even technology, which is so ubiquitous in our world? These are all such important things. And you actually hear people say, well, it needs to be all of these things. But in our overcrowded, testing-driven curriculum, how does that all fit? And so I'd offer you one idea today, one response, which is oftentimes listed as one of those 21st century skills, and that's global competence. And what global competence is there's a knowledge base to it. It's about helping kids understand the world and explain the world scientifically, mathematically, through the literature and the histories of the world, understanding current events. That's an important piece. It's also about a skill set, critical and creative thinking, having students communicate effectively. Those are all very important pieces to that skill set, problem solving, collaboration. And then finally, there's a values and perspective aspect to it. And that piece is really around how do we respect the differences that others are bringing in a much more diverse world these days. And so we're going to wrestle with some of these notions. Some people say, well, why do we need to even grapple with global competence? Well, it's because we're in a new economy. We trade today in information and technology. We need students who can help us think critically and creatively about sustainability and sustainable economies. There's a global interdependence in our world that requires us to work cross-nationally. There is a demographic diversity that we've never seen before, and understanding cultures and beliefs is more important. And finally, we are in an innovation-driven economy where the kids who are going to succeed in the world are those who are going to learn fast enough to keep up with the rapid changes. And so there's also an imperative for us about collaboration. Our challenges are complex and interdisciplinary in nature. When we start talking about things like water shortages or human rights issues around water access, or when we talk about pollution or environmental degradation or industrialization, or goodness knows we heard earlier about global health care and pandemics, or finally about climate change, whether the intended and unintended consequences of our actions are coming home to roost, and what are we going to do about them? They're going to require a level of collaboration and interdisciplinary thinking that we've never seen before. There's also a competitive edge to this, and President Obama said that in this quote, that a child born in Dallas is now competing with a child in New Delhi because of the internet connection and the 24/7 workforce that we're working in now, and that what's important is not what you do, but what you know. So, are our students ready for this? And most of our results would say no. So if you look at these statistics with me, World Savvy, it's a marvelous global education and global resource company, a nonprofit. They did a survey in 2012 of high school graduates 18 to 24 years of age. And of those high school graduates, 72% could not identify the region of the world where Afghanistan was, even though we have been in a war in Afghanistan for well over a decade. 47% could not identify where Libya was. 78% had no idea that Mandarin Chinese was the most commonly spoken language in the world. And it's beyond the discrete facts that we need to grapple with. When they ask them, well, what do you believe about global education and its importance? 80% of them said, I think jobs are becoming more global. Yet only 12% of them said, I had any instruction in high school that helped me understand the root causes of global issues. And yet we know of that 12% who said, yes, we had some instruction around global issues, 14% vote more often, locally and nationally, and 17% are more likely to go and seek out information to learn about a world issue that's going on that they know about. So I was fortunate. I was part of a national task force sponsored by the Council of Chief State School Officers. And folks from across the country came together and said, okay, if global competence is important, how the heck do we define it? What does it mean we're going to do in schools if this is something we want our students to know and be able to do? And so we came together and we said, well, first of all, that knowledge base is important. Students need to understand disciplinarily and interdisciplinarily about the world. That's an important piece, but it's what they do with that knowledge that's going to count. So one of the pieces is investigating the world. We want students to be able to ask a robust question, a researchable question about the world, and then to look at diverse information from multiple viewpoints to find out more information, to answer that question, to analyze and synthesize that together, and to come up with either a recommendation, an outcome, an answer to that question that is robust and defensible. We also want students to be able to recognize and weigh perspectives. Those perspectives, the differing perspectives around their issues, knowing that their own perspectives come from their lived experience, their background, their understanding, their education, and knowing that other children and other people come with a different set of backgrounds of experience and a different set of education and different perspectives as well, and learning how to find the common ground to navigate among those. We also want students to communicate effectively, verbally, non-verbally, in their own language, in another world language. Highly important. How to use media and technology to move communication forward in ethical and responsible ways, and to understand the power that communication can give us in solving some of these world dilemmas. And we also want them to take action, and I think this is the most important piece. This is the piece that speaks to the millennial generation that exists right now. They crave purpose and meaning. And we can give them that in schools. So when students are enabled to take action, to find something they're passionate about, to learn how to look at what's being done in that issue right now, to say, where might there be a gap, or where can I add value? And how can I do that in empowering ways to the people that I'm going to be working with? And then how can I reflect on the impact that I've had? This makes all the difference. So you may say, well, what does that look like when it starts happening in schools? I led a blessed life here in San Antonio. For 8 years, I was the principal of the International School of the Americas, a globally focused high school, when we were first grappling with these kinds of ideas. And from there, we got noticed. And I got tapped to go to New York and work for the Asia Society and create the International Studies Schools Network, a national network of schools in primarily urban underserved communities that are doing just this kind of education. So if you'll bear with me, I just want to show you some pictures from those schools about what learning can look like around this. These are a group of kindergarten and first graders. They're from a school called the Ambassador School of Global Education in Los Angeles. These kids are in a dual language immersion school where they're all studying English and either Spanish or Korean, but all of them take Mandarin Chinese. They're on a learning expedition to Chinatown in Los Angeles, using their new Mandarin Chinese skills in the marketplace. It's a powerful opportunity for them to start working on their language and starting to learn about the culture. This is a group of students from the International School of the Americas. Excuse me, I just swallowed a bug. The International School of the Americas has a learning expedition for all of their juniors as part of a American history and American literature interdisciplinary unit. And these students do a civil rights tour of the South. They're about to walk across the bridge in Selma. They've met with civil rights leaders. They have visited with the Southern Poverty Law Center to look at the work we still have to do. And then they come back and they compare that information to other civil rights movements around the world, such as the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. Or this group, this is a sophomore project. And in this project, they've been studying about acculturation and assimilation as part of an interdisciplinary unit in world history and world literature. They've looked at colonialism across time. They've looked what happens to the indigenous people when colonialism exists. and then they bring it home. They go to New Mexico to look at the plight of Native Americans in our own country. They're at the Jemez Puebla. They meet with tribal leaders, but more importantly, they meet with students who are living one foot in the world on the reservation of trying to preserve their cultural heritage and the other foot in the modern world of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a powerful lesson when they can learn firsthand what acculturation and assimilation looks like. And then perspectives. One of the best things we do across the networks of schools is we have Model United Nations, where students take on the role of a delegate. They're assigned a country. They must authentically represent that country's views on the issues that are being debated in their United Nations committee, and they're wrestling with the same issues they did in New York just a few weeks ago when the United Nations was in session, and they work cross-nationally to craft the same kinds of resolutions. Incredibly powerful learning on taking on another perspective. Many of our schools during the freshman year take their students to Heifer Ranch in Perryville, Arkansas. And I know Perryville, Arkansas does not sound like the bastion of global learning of the world, but at Heifer Ranch, they have replicated the housing of 13 developing countries. And students go and put away their technology for 3 days. They are unplugged. They live sustainably. The students you see here are getting their allocation of food for an average family in that village. And they're thinking about how are we going to barter with other villages, walk to carry water to bring it back to our village, cook over an open fire, tend to the animals. They come back with a distinct sense of the difference between want and need after that trip. Or here's a global art class who studied how different cultures honor and remember the dead. They studied both Latin America and compared it to Japan, and they happened to build altars that are going to be on display at the Institute of Texan Cultures as part of Dia de los Muertos celebration at the end of this month. And each student got to record their remembrances that will play along with their altars on display. Real audiences, real perspectives. Kids need to communicate effectively. This is a group of students from the Ambassador School for Global Leaders in Los Angeles, the secondary school. These students put on their own TEDx conference, student run, focused around the 4 areas of global competence. Their school is housed in the old Ambassador Hotel where Robert Kennedy was assassinated. Their closing speaker was Kerry Kennedy, talking about how Robert Kennedy lived his life to take action. These kids understood effective communication. Here's another group of kids. They're using a fabulous program called Global Nomads, where they teleconference for an entire year back and forth with a classroom in Jordan, talking about current issues, histories, how their lived lives are, talking offline on social media with one another. Again, firsthand experience in sharing perspectives. And this is just a screenshot out of a marvelous student film, a student documentary that was created by a young man outside of Chicago. He lived in an area of Chicago called Little Mexico. His assignment from school was find an issue that affects your community and affects a community abroad and create something around that. What he thought was going to be just a comparative essay or maybe even a film, he thought that could be neat, turned into this amazing exploration about environmental racism that catalyzed a community. He won the Goldman Sachs Prize in International Education for Youth Media for his film Border Crossings. And then, what happens when kids take action? This is a group of Model United Nations students who were so moved by a speaker that spoke at their conference about the eradication of landmines that over 2 years they collected $20,000 to sponsor and raise a landmine sniffing dog. So there in the picture you see Legacy, who's now serving in Balad, Iraq. A powerful opportunity to find a compelling idea and take action. Many of our schools have Make a Difference projects where students at their freshman year have to delve into the community, find something they're passionate about, research it, how does it have international connections, create an informational website, and then they have to design a plan and go forth and take action. This is a fair where they're sharing the actions they've taken and are enlisting others to get involved with those exact same initiatives. And then you remember the one I was telling you about on acculturation and assimilation. In this photo right here, these students are holding an advocacy fair. After they returned from New Mexico, they said, what cultures in San Antonio are slipping away? And they went and looked for those cultures. They found organizations that were working to maintain those cultures here. And these students partnered with them to create an advocacy fair, to raise money to support those organizations for cultural maintenance in our own community right here. Powerful, powerful learning. So when students do this kind of learning, great things happen. First, they discover what they care about and what they're passionate about. They also delve deeply into rigorous learning. They authentically demonstrate their knowledge to real audiences. They feel empowered. They feel efficacious in the work that they do. They take a wider lens look at the world. They also learn beyond the classroom walls. This isn't your traditional school. We're not doing a STAR workbook at this point. They believe change is possible. They know they can make a difference, and they find relevance. So I have one last thing to do for you. It's an Alice Walker poem that I hope will be your charge. To the extent that it is possible, you must live in the world today as you wish everyone to live in the world to come. That can be your contribution. Otherwise, the world you want will never be formed. Why? Because you're waiting for others to do what you're not doing, and they're waiting for you, and so on. And our kids don't deserve so on. So my charge to you today is to dream big. Dream about what education could be for our children, and not just for the children that we know and love in our lives, but for all of our children. And then my second charge to you is to ask more. Ask more of your elected officials. Ask more of your district officials. Ask more of your school leaders and your teachers. Ask more of your kids. It's important, because that's the only way we're going to bridge the relevance gap for all of our kids. Thank you.